Art subscription boxes are so much fun, but I hadn't subscribed to any in a while just because I had so many supplies starting to mount up. I've typically only done art snacks, but I've always been curious about Sketchbox. Sketchbox had a grab box, all ink supply offered on their Facebook page with something like $85 worth of supplies for $35, so I couldn't resist. In this box, I received 2 different kinds of paper, Magnani made in Italy, and also Arnhem 1618. I'd never heard of any of these brands, but they seem really fancy, not gonna lie. Some Higgins white ink. I have used this brand before just because one of the places I work and teach art classes had a huge donation of this brand of ink, and it works pretty well. I've enjoyed it so far, but I've never used the white. Some Rapid Graph ink in orange. Some Speedball Super Black India ink, which is always a classic. Love this. I love the really, really dark, high contrast it can provide. Lemon Yellow, also Speedball Calligraphy ink. I also got 3 different colors of Sketchbox's signature acrylic ink. A bottle of Hero Arts Gold Glitter ink. This should be fun. I love anything metallic or sparkly integrated into art. Also a King Art medium point inkline pen. And a silver white flat detail brush. Yay! Love these. Super excited about this. And now, this is the oddest shaped pen I've ever seen. This should be interesting. I have no idea how to use this. I will definitely have to read the instructions. And another Sketchbox signature item. One of those fun loaded brushes that have the ink already in them and you just squeeze and it comes out the brush. So this will be fun to try. So, sorry, my progress is going to skip ahead a little bit on this first ink drawing / painting because I didn't realize that I wasn't recording. That's okay though, it saves this video from being ridiculously long because I have 2 different pieces that I'm going to do, both inspired by local Japanese garden in Saginaw, Michigan, where I live. We've been having unseasonably warm weather for fall in Michigan, and so I've been taking advantage of going outside a lot, and I took some really cool photos recently that I used as inspiration for both of these. So funny, I thought this loaded brush wasn't working at first because I could not get any ink to come out. Just a warning, if you do get something like this, when you're initially using it brand new, you do have to squeeze the sides back and forth about 100 times, but then once it gets started, you're good to go. I have to be honest, just personal preference, I typically don't like these kinds of loaded brushes very much. I feel like they're more difficult to use and I'd rather just have a regular brush, I guess, and dip it in the paint. I'm always feeling like you either don't get enough out or you squeeze and then a ton comes out and it ruins your painting, but this one actually has a lot of really great control and a nice even flow. And the brush quality on it is actually really great, which you don't always get with these. Sometimes they come with a, crappy brush head. So overall, this is my favorite one of this type of brush that I've tried. I also enjoyed the Sketchbox signature inks. They work a lot like watercolor, and I love watercolor. They're a lot like just watercolor that already has the water in it. They have really nice, soft, transparent colors, so I definitely enjoyed using these as a watercolor person. I feel like they'd mesh really well with that type of medium. The calligraphy ink is also really great for painting with. It's completely different. Opposite to those, it's really opaque actually, so it does truly go on like more of an acrylic, but just a little more, flowy. So it has less body and works more like watercolor, but has the opaqueness of acrylic. So I really enjoyed that as well, and it dries with kind of a glossy, almost enamel-like sheen to it. Something else I found as I was layering over the yellow ink, the yellow calligraphy ink, is that it kind of partially repels other watery ink that you put over it. Not all the way, but you can see a little difference in how the ink sets on top of that versus the paper. And that's different than the other inks that I'm using so far that came with this box. None of the other ones have that sort of resistance. And I actually think that's kind of cool because it can give you different effects knowing that. Trying my two blacks. The Sketchbox Signature ink, which is actually a charcoal, versus the India ink. And I love them both. I love working in grayscale, so these were both really fun to try. And the Sketchbox Signature ink, again, is a lot more transparent and watercolory. Even when I haven't added water, it gives me a nice soft gray. The India ink is a lot more just high contrast black, like super jet black. So it's fun to actually use them together and layer them, definitely, especially when you're working on a grayscale ink drawing or illustration. So I'm going to have a lot of fun using both of those together, I think. All of these inks layer great and work really well together, and I've noticed that they don't blend or smudge too much, hardly at all, once they're dry. So when they're wet, you can go ahead and blend them together and they'll run together, but they dry fairly quickly and really soak into the paper, and then they do not budge even when you put another wet medium over them. So that's excellent. The gold shimmer ink, unfortunately, seems like it might have been a little bit old and it came kind of chunky, but I was able to reconstitute it and just shake it up, and I can work around the chunks and it still is usable. So that's really the only flaw I know so far. I don't know if it was that it was old or it just doesn't have as much of a shelf life and kind of dries out more quickly than the other inks. But either way, still a lot in there that's usable, and I really like how it works. It definitely adds a lot of shimmer, but it's very transparent, so it's subtle. It's not just like a big solid streak of gold, so it really pairs well, again, just to add some kind of fun highlights to the ink that's already there. Now, this funky pen I tried once before I was recording when I had my oops at the beginning, and I hated it. I'm like, why would you not just use a normal pen? I absolutely hate this, and I wasn't gonna use it again, but then I remembered, wait, the whole point of these boxes is you're supposed to try new things, which is what I would tell my students, so I decided to give it another go. You load ink into the top, kind of like an airbrush, and then it just slowly makes its way out the bottom, and you can really get a nice thin line, just like with a regular pen, but because it's actually liquid ink coming out, the cool thing is I found I really like using it when part of what I'm outlining is still partially wet, so that all of a sudden you get this burst of the ink color bleeding out. And so I changed my mind about this. I do think for certain purposes it will be really useful and really great. And once I got the hang of the different way you kind of have to hold it and angle it, I think this is a very cool tool, and I never would have chosen to buy something like this on my own. So that's what's great about these boxes, is you end up with things that you never would have purchased if you would have just went to the art supply store. The only item that was a traditional pen, like I was thinking in my head originally, is really nice. It's different than the other kinds of pens I have that have a specific line weight, where it's just medium and you can get thinner or slightly thicker weights depending how you angle it and how hard you press, but it still has a very tough, hard nib. So it's not quite like a brush pen, but it's a little different than just your traditional ink pen. I'm one of those people that uses like the .05 pen pretty often, so this is a little bit thicker than what I usually use, but again, I think it will definitely come in handy for certain things when I want a little bit of a thicker weight and when I want to just be able to use one pen instead of having to change between different line weights, because you can get a little bit of variety with this depending how hard you press. I also have to say I appreciate the color scheme of this box. Sometimes with these boxes, the colors you get together are just, yikes, completely random. And this might have been randomly assembled, I don't know, but it seems like actually they put some thought into what colors to put with this box. I feel like they're not necessarily a typical color scheme. They're a little odd, but odd in a good way, and they really, really, really work well together and complement each other. Both these papers are really nice. I've never used paper like this. When I'm doing ink wash type stuff, I typically just use watercolor paper, so this was really interesting to try. Some of the differences I noticed are the Italian one seems to let everything soak in a lot more instantly. Like the ink just is absorbed instantly, sucked right into it, and then it sets pretty quick. So that would definitely be what I would use when I want to do a little bit less blending, like more layering, less blending while wet. Whereas the 1618 one reminds me a lot more of traditional watercolor paper. Both of them are obviously very, very excellent quality. I mean, you don't really notice any buckling at all. No pilling, and I was really getting this super soaked as I was working, so very impressed. I also wanted to mention a difference I noticed with the Rapid Graph ink versus the other inks. This ink seems to work more like a stain, how it sets down on the paper, whereas the other inks work more like traditional ink or watercolor paint. So that's the main difference I noticed, is the Rapid Graph ink really just instantly stains the paper, but it doesn't set on the surface at all. So this is more just to, like I said, stain with color rather than actually try to maybe blend with other inks. So this would definitely be more for putting down a layer and then working other colors on top of it. I've also enjoyed using the white ink. This is something that I think I will use a lot, especially with, again, the watercolor work that I do. Anyone that uses watercolors has probably noticed that white watercolor is basically useless. It just doesn't, it either does nothing or it does something, but it doesn't look good. Not a fan. And a lot of people use white gouache with watercolor instead, but I'm just not, I don't know. I don't enjoy using that material. Again, personal preference. I've just never had much luck with it myself. I don't enjoy working with it. But this white ink is great. It does exactly what I want it to do, where it can add really subtle highlights on top and just add that little bit of white without looking like, whoa, totally opaque, bright white. It just soaks right in and blends with whatever's underneath seamlessly. So I will definitely be using this a lot. I really like it. And never would have thought of using white ink instead of, another paint type material. I had a lot of fun with this box, and I'm so glad I gave it a try and let myself be surprised. This definitely gave me a lot of new products to try. And everything in this box, basically, I know that I'll continue using in my own art going forward. I would have never purchased all these things individually, so again, well worth it and a super great deal. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see future art subscription unboxings, materials reviews, fun demos, step-by-step projects, anything having to do with art, be sure to subscribe.